Today in Math 2, we're going to be reviewing reflections, which is the second type of transformation that we're studying. Before we begin, I just want to remind you of the different types of lines that you may see that you could possibly be reflecting over. So when we have a coordinate plane just like this, of course, the x-axis is the one that runs from left to right, and the y-axis goes vertical. Sometimes I may ask you to reflect over one of these axes. So for example, if I had given you, let's say, the point 3, 1, which is right here in the first quadrant, we'll call that point A. So the location of that point is in the first quadrant at 3, 1. If I ask you to reflect this over the x-axis, all you're going to do is to make sure that the new point, the image of this given point, is the same number of spaces on the opposite side. So in this example, since the A is one space above the x-axis, after I reflect it, the A prime is going to be one space below the x-axis. So I would do the same number of spaces above, I would come here, and this would be the location of A prime. Now, that is if I'm reflecting over the x-axis. Let's pretend for a moment that I wanted to reflect over the y-axis instead of the x-axis. Then, from this line of reflection, point A is 3 spaces to the right. So if I'm going to reflect over the y-axis, I'm just going to make sure that my new point becomes 3 spaces to the left, and that would be how I would label that one. Now, oftentimes you will see me in class, I will highlight where my line of reflection is, but hopefully you see the symmetry. If we just focus on the reflection over the x-axis, you can see the symmetry that they are one space on each side of that axis. When we did the y-axis, hopefully you can see the symmetry there, that you're 3 spaces to the right or you're 3 spaces to the left. But what happens if you're reflecting over something that is not the x or the y-axis? For example, what if I tell you to reflect over this vertical line right here? Okay, sometimes I'm going to give you an equation of a line that you have to reflect over. So this is where you've got to remember equations of lines from Math 1. The vertical lines are always going to be x equals equations. So this line that I have highlighted here, this would be the vertical line at x equals 2. Now I know that because if I come over on the x-axis to where x is 2, that is the vertical line where x is 2. If I told you to reflect over this line, then you're still going to count the number of spaces and find the symmetry on the opposite side. So since my A is one space to the right of this line of reflection, my new point, I would just count one space to the left, and that's where I would put my new point. Wherever the line is that you're reflecting over, make sure that you count the number of spaces on the opposite side. If I told you to, let's say, reflect over the vertical line at x equals -4, then you would come over to 1, 2, 3, x is -4, and this would be the line of reflection. So anytime that you're reflecting over a vertical line, you need to make sure that that equation is an x equals. This would be the equation x equals -4. So anytime they ask you to reflect over an equation that is x equals some constant, that will be a vertical line. As a matter of fact, the y-axis, if you were going to actually write an equation, that would be the equation at x equals 0. Okay, so when I'm looking at this would be the vertical line at x is 0, x is 1, x is 2, x is 3. You can go vertical lines this way. You can go vertical lines that are negative. Now, with that being said, that means that your horizontal lines would be y equals equations. So if I came in here and I highlighted this line, this would be the equation y equals 3. You come up on the y-axis to where y is 3. That horizontal line would be the equation y equals 3. The x-axis is essentially the equation y equals 0. If I slide down, this would be a horizontal line at y is -1, y is -2, y is -3. Okay, so vertical and horizontal lines are the typical lines that you will be reflecting over. Now, it's also possible that I might ask you to reflect over a line that has an equation in it, like y equals x. Those are some special cases that we will get to at a later date. But for right now, I just want you to practice reflecting over vertical and horizontal lines. Now, there is an attached worksheet for this, so I'm going to go over a couple of these examples with you. Okay, the first problem, we're going to reflect over the line y equals -2. Now, as I just mentioned, y equals -2 should be a horizontal line. So I'm going to come down to where y is -2, and I like to highlight my line of reflection. Everything in problem number 1 is going to be reflected over that horizontal line at y is -2. So here we go. If I start with point Q, because point Q is currently 2 spaces below that line, when I reflect it, I'm going to make sure that my Q prime is 2 spaces above that line. The original pre-image is 2 below, so after I reflect it, the new one is 2 above. Okay? This point down here, it's kind of hard to see, but that's actually labeled point Z. Point Z is 1, 2, 3 spaces below. So now 1, 2, 3 spaces above is going to be where my Z prime is. Point E is 1 space below. So once this gets reflected, my E prime will be 1 space above. So I will plot and label. And now notice the point I. Because this point is actually sitting on the line that I'm going to reflect over, it's not actually going to change. So the segment that's below it will now flip and be above it, but this point is actually the exact same point, which means that point I and point I prime are going to be at the exact same spot. So now I'm just going to connect my dots, and you can see that you have a quadrilateral that is a perfect reflection over that line y equals -2. Okay, if I look at example number 2, this time we want to reflect over the x-axis. So this time I will just highlight the x-axis and I would reflect over that one. Now, I'm not going to do all 4 points in this quadrilateral, but we'll just do a couple. Since A is counted 1, 2, 3 spaces above the x-axis, the reflection is going to be 1, 2, 3 spaces below the x-axis. So I'm going to plot and label A prime. I can do the same thing with W. It is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces above the x-axis. So I'm going to come down 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces below the x-axis, and I will plot and label that one as W prime. You will do the same thing for every single one of the points, reflecting over vertical lines or horizontal lines. Please remember that you can always go back and rewatch this video. You can email me and we can do some Google Meets if you need to, if you have any questions.